Ready?
We're ready.
Ready. Oh. Hello and welcome to Alan Simpson, our lovely guest. I'm Neve Edmonds and I'm reporting to NCN TV studio. I just want to start by asking, why did you start a career in politics?
I don't think I ever thought I'd have a career in politics. I blame it all on my kids, in that when they started to arrive, I looked at the world that they were about to move into and thought, this is a mess. It's a real mess. And what job do I have as a parent? It was to try to make it less of a mess. So that's when I started to get involved at the level of community politics and then city-wide politics and trying to change the overarching policies that were going to affect their lives. And at some point, I'd always been a member of the Labour Party, and at some point, various people said, look, you're not going to change anything when you're not in Parliament. And I said, oh, I don't want to go into Parliament. And they said, well, that's the problem. If people want to change the world, stay outside Parliament, then, and those who go in don't want to change the world, we're never going to get out of the mess that we're in. And I didn't have a good enough answer at that point to say no. So I ended up getting drawn into the selection process, and then having got selected, I done 4 elections, and I ended up in Parliament. So there wasn't a plan, it was a default.
It was kind of a off route. So what was your career idea before politics? Did you have one?
Yeah, the bizarre thing is I never really had a career. That I think I'd always had this belief that I could change things for the better. And I was organisationally active in trying to change things at a community level and then at a national policy level. So that's where it went, and this was the rather foolish belief that I might be able to change the world, which I've never actually surrendered. I still harbour this belief that if I just focus hard enough, I might just be able to do that.
So what actually made you want to be a Member of Parliament?
Well, I didn't. As I say, I didn't start off wanting to be a Member of Parliament. I ended up as a Member of Parliament. Though I have to say that having been there, it's not something that I would at all regret. It was a very privileged position. It allowed me to fight for and support all sorts of different campaigns, and to try to bring another voice into Parliament that wasn't necessarily represented by those who presumed themselves to be the natural leaders and rulers of the country. So that was how I ended up there. But I think the important thing that I would now say is that the really big questions about anyone with an interest in Parliament is, what is it that you want to bring to that, rather than just your own personal ambition? And the second is, what experience do you have to bring? And my worry is that if I look at the nature of the current Parliament and the current intake, it's full of far too many people who have never had a real job and who have no particular expertise to bring at a time when the world desperately needs a wider perspective than just having been to university, having served as an MP's special advisor or researcher or gopher, and then got yourself a seat and leave it into Parliament. That doesn't seem to me to be sufficient to engage with the scale of the problems that the world is having to address and address now.
Yes. So moving on from your life choices, I want to kind of ask you a few more questions about your work as a politician. Working for an MP for Nottingham South, what issues or problems have you faced, and how did you resolved them yourself?
Well, the background that I took with me when I went into Parliament was as a community worker and having concentrated really on two specific areas. One was around fuel poverty and housing, and the other was around juvenile crime and alternatives to prison. So those were the two areas. And also, outside of that, I had for many years been the regional chair of CND as a campaign against nuclear weapons.
Yes.
So those were the three elements that I took in with me. What did I bring? Then a knowledge of having worked with an awful lot of community groups in the constituency that I was representing. And I think that was really my lifeline, because it was that sense of roots within the community that helped to gravitate my judgment on issues when I was in Parliament.
Yeah.
It's a very peculiar bubble world that can easily suck you in and seduce you into believing that reality was only what existed within that bubble and what the press who operated within that bubble were interested in talking about.
Yeah.
And actually a lot of it wasn't at all connected to reality. It was more connected to gossip, Westminster gossip, than global issues.
Yes. So another thing that you've done whilst you've been involved in politics, why did you launch the Labour Against War campaign in the mid-90s?
Well, it seemed to me that I had been involved in the anti-war movement for a long time. I'd been involved in the campaign against the war that Britain got involved in relation to the Malvinas.
Yes.
And it seemed to me bizarre, a bizarre legacy of colonialism and empire, to think that Britain should fight a war about a territory that existed on the other side of the planet, believing that it was still British. And it was the sort of legacies of empire and conquest that troubled me. And whatever else I felt was a way of resolving things, war was not the answer. So that was where I really became active in the national campaigns against the war. And it just followed through in relation to the pretext given for the war against Afghanistan, when we knew that after 9/11, the reality was that the bombers had far stronger connections with Saudi Arabia than with Afghanistan. And the first war on Iraq and the second, all of these just seemed to be the pretext for finding an external enemy as a cover for much bigger damage that was being done to our domestic economy and our place within the world. So that was what threw me into the active campaigning and what ended up with me being the national chair of Labour Against the War.
Yes. Do you feel as though your campaign changed anything in the big picture?
No, I don't think it did. But at the end of the day, I think that there is merit to be attached to those who stood out against the prevailing mood. And if there is something to be carried through, it is the importance of people being willing to make a stand on principle. Even if you lose, and even if you rely on history to prove you right. It was a bizarre experience, not only the sense of producing a rebuttal document to Labour's dodgy dossier, which was a scary time in a way, because that dodgy dossier was to be released on the morning of whenever it was, and we'd prepared the counter dossier in anticipation of what we thought it would say. And so that was publicised, and we circulated it the night before the dodgy dossier came out and was handed to us. And the fear was that we'd missed something, that Labour or Blair would have found a smoking gun, a lurking nuclear weapon somewhere. And there wasn't. It was just littered with innuendos and inaccuracies. So, that was quite a big moment. And those two documents stand side by side now. One which is eminently true, which was ours, and the other which was eminently untrue, which was the official one. It was useful in a different way in that it also fitted into the international landscape where there was a group of us who were MPs from 5 different countries, and we formed our own independent team of weapons inspectors and tried to conduct weapons inspections in the United States. We flew into Washington and tried to conduct weapons inspections in this place called the Edgewood Chemical and Biological Research Center just outside Washington. And I notified Rumsfeld and Cheney that we were going and expected to have full and open access in the same way that the weapons inspectors did, and assured him that, providing we were allowed in, none of us would declare war on the United States.
Wow.
And we were duly met by a line of military at the base that flatly refused to allow us in. And it was the one time in my life when I've actually found myself being followed around by pro-war protesters, people with banners and placards that said, "Give war a chance." And that bizarre of all was a huge one that read, "Today Iraq, tomorrow France." And I thought, this is clearly an administration, if not a whole country, that had lost the plot on international peace building and stability.
Yes. So on the topic of war, nuclear power, you're a consistent voter against nuclear power or the nuclear power weapon system. Why are you against nuclear power?
Nuclear power, let me just deal with that as a separate from the weapons, because I think I dealt with the weapons. Nuclear power, I have lots of arguments with people who are pro-nuclear, and I end up saying that I think it's a bit like the relationship between me and Angelina Jolie, in that in principle, this might sound to be a really good idea. In practice, is it ever going to happen? No. I think me and Angelina are a better bet than an economically viable nuclear solution to the energy crisis. Nuclear is now the one energy source that is on an ever-rising cost curve, against the backcloth of us having not a single clue about long-term waste disposal strategies. And the reason that we're still wedded to the nuclear delusion is, I think, based on, first of all, the power of the lobbying power of the big nuclear industry interests. And the second is a broader fear that it's a bogeyman politics. If you don't keep throwing huge quantities of public money at us, the lights will go out. And so, it was the thing that your mum said to you when you were a kid: "You can't do that because do that and the bogeyman will get you." It's a nonsense, and it's actually more of a nonsense today than at any time in my life, because the alternatives are so much more accessible and so much cheaper and so much more sustainable and inclusive. And I think the technology that your generation is much more comfortable with than mine, that is changing everything by the day. So the old model of a nuclear power station over there with high voltage transmission lines coming into everyone's home and a power station to plug relationship, a one-way street that was the energy system, is no longer what energy is about. From my house, I produce more electricity than I consume. That around the world, we're now finding that increasingly households are becoming producers as well as consumers. And energy storage is allowing us not only to each produce clean energy with a surplus, but to store it in batteries in our own homes or within the community, so that we can share those energy surpluses, and we keep the lights on in much smarter ways. Well, the big energy companies know this, and they know that it's the kiss of death for them.
Yes.
That's why all the lobbying and publicity goes in as frighteners that say, if you don't throw shed loads of money at us, the country will be plunged into darkness, and it won't. So we have to be brave enough to live in tomorrow, today and tomorrow, not today and yesterday.
Yes. The last topic or questions that I want to ask you about is some political advice towards me, everyone in this room, all the young voters and stuff. I just want to ask you, why should people, how should people vote? Young people, should people vote for Labour? Why should people vote Conservative? Young people, I mean. If you could answer that for me.
Yeah. Let me start with the question, should people vote?
Yes.
And I'll go back to my childhood. My granddad was quite fierce with all of us. And he said in non-negotiable terms, look, I don't care how you vote. In fact, I do care how you vote. But what I'd be really cross about was if you didn't vote, because my parents and my grandparents, they fought for you to have the right to vote. And to think that people give their lives for you to sit on the sofa watching Coronation Street instead of bloody voting is a heinous crime. So you're going to get out there and you're going to vote. I don't care what you do, but just get off your bum and be part of the process. Now, I think there is merit in that as a starting point. When I was an MP, I thought there was even merit in those who had gone into the polling station and written words of abuse, either to all of us or to some of the candidates, because at least it was an engaged indignation, not a passive one. So that, for me, is the starting point, is to recognise that the right to vote is a birthright that we have now that previous generations didn't have and they had to fight for. So we shouldn't just throw that away. How you vote is another matter. I have only ever been a member of the Labour Party and only ever will be, I think.
Yeah.
Now, people would say my record in Parliament as a sort of a serial rebel made me out of line with the Labour Party. I've always argued that I was never out of line. It was just the line was out of place. And so my job was to try to, as much to write the next manifesto as to honour the last one. And we shouldn't find ourselves neutralised because of elements of what is currently on offer that are insufficient. You work with what you have and you bring to the table what you should have. And I think that is the sense of being engaged that I try to share with your generation.
Yeah.
Because the pressures on you to disengage are massive.
Yeah.
That on the one hand you have this fantastic set of changes and gains in telecommunications, which means that you're a much more globally informed generation than I ever was, or my generation ever was, which is fantastic. On the other hand, it is an individualizing technology as well, and it can subtract from you in terms of active engagement. And one of the messages that I try to take round is to say, if we understand things that are happening on a global scale, in a sense the obligation that comes with that is to engage with becoming part of that momentum for change. And most frequently I come across people who say, but what can I do? What can we do here? it's tough and there's no way in. Well, we are a rich part of the planet. If we're disengaged, it's because we've become fragmented. And if you want to look at starting points, there's a humble but inspiring reference just to be taking right now from elsewhere. I discovered over the summer, in June, July, in India, the state of Uttar Pradesh planted 50 million trees in one day. 50 million trees, using 800,000 volunteers. Now, this doesn't stop India stupidly investing in more coal mines, but it is a civic recognition that putting back into the planet an ability to breathe, to absorb carbon, to hold potential flooding. All of these can be done by the poor at a level that is inspirational if we act together. And I'd say if the poor can mobilize 800,000 of themselves, we ought to be able to organize ourselves in 8s and 10s and 80s and 100s to be the drivers of our own engaged change. We just have to be heretical enough to see ourselves as change makers rather than passive consumers of a dip into a political bag of sweets at election time.
Yes. Last question, really, I think. Speaking about the amount of people who go vote, why do you think such a low number of young people actually vote?
Well, let me turn that one round and say, who cares whether you vote? That's the hard question. I think the establishments in the UK, and whether that is the national media establishment or the political establishment, I think they would look at young people and see the potential engagement, mass engagement, as being a very disruptive influence. You see that in the Labour Party now in the sort of publicity that is given to Momentum, whereas the same publicity around the time of the emergence of New Labour as a sort of centrist, individualising political momentum, a movement of educated self-interest coming through. That wasn't denounced as conspiratorial.
Yes.
But momentum is denounced. And I think that if the system saw young people as being engaged and the drivers of change, then it would rightly fear the involvement, the impact that young people could have on electoral outcomes. So that's why I think people are either discouraged or encouraged to be cynical. It don't matter. What effect do I have? I'm not doing this. They're all as corrupt as you. That sense of cynicism invites a voluntary surrender of those democratic rights that other generations fought to secure because they knew that if used collectively, they could be real tools for change.
Yes. So what would you say to people to encourage them to vote?
I'd say you need to look at what are the issues that this society has to address in many ways within the coming decade that will have the most profound influence on your life and your prospects. And in that sense, if I were putting myself in that position, I would say I had really big vested interests in aligning with a movement that made it illegal to have 0 hours contracts. That the gig economy is just a way of returning to an era of serfdom. That I think that I would have vested interests in holding business to account. It is ethically untenable to say that you as a worker should pay taxes because you live here and work here and get paid here, but the people the corporation that employs you can be ethical if it pays no taxes and parks its money offshore. If you tried to do that, you'd have the revenue on you and criminalise you. So we have to, I would have a vested interest in reversing this shift in favouring from citizens to corporations. Yeah. And the third element is that if I, for a moment, take seriously what science is telling us about the damage that we're doing to the planet and how little time we've got to avoid getting consumed in an era of climate crises, I would be saying, the likes of you, whoever you are, my current MP, I'm not going to give you any breathing space until I'm certain that I will have breathing space to follow. And so that means you making changes in this decade that will give me the decades that follow. So that's why I'm going to be engaged and I'm going to be on your case. So, you know, that's the why. Yes. The how is actually a space of massive luxury, because never before in human history have we had ways of delivering clean energy, sustainable living answers in a politics of inclusion. The problem is that runs counter to all of the vested interests that currently dominate the global economy. Well, that's what we have to change.
Yes. Righty-ho. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Everyone in this room really appreciates it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. That's it from NCN Studio. Thank you and good night. Agree with. I'm a member of the Green Party, so I'm massively against everything that you said. It was kind of hard not to interrupt you and so I was just like yeah. It was nice speaking to you actually.
Yeah. The nice thing for me was that throughout the entirety of my time as an MP, the Green Party never stood a candidate against me.
Nope.
And I did loads of work with the Green Party, and I still advise Caroline Lucas.
I love Caroline Lucas.
And they just said, why would we stand against you when actually you run with our policies? Yeah. And all we'd do is subtract votes from you.
See, an awful lot of Green Party members that I speak to